Hey guys, okay, so we are going to learn about making an offer, writing an offer today. So congratulations, you got yourself a buyer and they're like, hey, I want to make an offer on this property, and you're freaking out going, what do I do? So I'm going to show you right here. Let me share my screen. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do, what I typically do is I'll either sit down with my client and talk to them about what type of offer they want to make. Let me unshare so I'll chat with you. All right, so first everybody does it differently, but I like to sit down with my client, figure out what type of offer they want to make, write it all out, have all my notes, and then tell them, awesome, I'm going to go back to my office, I'll write it up, and I will email it over to you for signatures, and we can go over it together then. Or you book an appointment right there on the spot. So say you're at the property, and they're like, Dave, I want to write an offer right now. No problem. Let's talk about the offer. You're going to go to the kitchen counter and you're just going to start filling it out as far as taking notes. What's your purchase price? How long do you want your escrow to be? What's the name on the offer? Excellent. Let me go back to my office. I'll write up the offer. How about you guys, here's a Starbucks card. Go have a cup of coffee. Give me about an hour and let's meet at my office for an appointment and I'll go over the offer with you. If that doesn't work, if you're more, the clients are like, I want it right there, then it's let's go back to the office, put them in the conference room and you write it right there on the spot too. Make sure that you're familiar with the offer procedure before you bring your client. So if you're newer and you're having a little hard time, or you need someone like myself or one of our broker support to help you write the offer, don't bring the client in if that's the case, or make sure you put the client in the conference room and then you're working in the back office. Jumping through the hoops to get it. You never want the client to feel like you don't know what you're doing. So if that's the case, you're at the house, they go, I want to write an offer. No problem. Here we go. So we're going to log into car.org. Let me share my screen. Boom. Okay, car.org. We're going to log in. And this is a residential purchase contract. So an RPA, you'll hear that term get thrown around a lot, doing an RPA. All right, so this is loading right now. All right, so with the residential purchase contract, down here, ABC. All right, so we talked about the residential listing contract last time, residential purchase contract. Boom, click on that. It's going to bring it up over here. Double click, brings you into the residential. Now, again, as I talked before, anytime you have new business or any business, you're always disclosing. The very first thing that you do is disclose your agency relationship. So what is your role in this? You'll talk about what the role is of the listing agent and talk about the role of the buyer's agent. Now, you are talking to a buyer, making an offer. So this is your role right now, buyer's agent. So sometimes I even circle that if I have the client right there. So it basically shows that I disclose to them my role. Your role as a buyer's agent is a fiduciary responsibility to treat them honestly and fairly, to disclose all material facts. And then also, if for any reason the listing is in-house. So try to wrap your head around this, but this is the brokerage. So you have your umbrella. If we have an agent over here that is the listing agent and you are representing the buyer, well, that is technically a dual agency. So you are explaining that to your buyer that as we write offers, if this agency has the listing, that is considered dual agency. Or you might be the listing agent and you're finding the buyer. And so you're explaining the role of a dual agency. And again, it's to treat both parties honestly and fairly. Your fiduciary responsibility is to honest, fairly, in dealings with both buyer and seller, and disclose any and all material facts. So really your job is to facilitate the transaction on behalf of both of the clients. So you're coming down here, buyer's name, you're asking Mr. Buyer, how would you like, who is holding title? Well, who's writing the offer? Is it an entity? Is it you? Is it you and your spouse? Is it you and your partner? Is it you and your friend? Who's going to be on the offer? So this is Mr. Seller. In these lines right here, you are to only put one seller at a time, or one buyer at a time, I'm sorry. So if you have two buyers, you would click right here and go buyer two. If you have more than two buyers, there's an additional form called an additional signee form, and you would add more buyers onto that. So don't go comma buyer three, comma buyer four. When you go for e-signatures, this will cause a glitch or an issue that is a pain. So you only put one buyer at a time in these forms. Then down here it says who's representing, what brokerage is representing the buyer. That's Hubble Real Estate Group. Then it's asking what is the BRE number? 019919998. That is Hubble Real Estate Group's corporate number. Down here is where you put your name. So Mr. Agent, or in my case, it would be David Hubble. And then over here, it's asking what is my broker ID number? 017862294. There you go. Now, with the seller, you need to get the seller's information. So on the MLS, if you click on the APN number, it will pull up the tax records. On those tax records, so if I'm on here, I go car.org, oh, whoops, crmls.org, and some of you use Rapatoni, some of you use Matrix. So whatever your system is, you're trying to pull up tax records. So in my case, I'd go to Realist, and under Realist is our tax information for San Luis Obispo County. So again, if you're outside the county, talk to me about what your tax system is. Most MLSs have some sort of tax system hooked to it. So you'd come in here and we're going to look up, let's go to 71 Ponderosa. Boom. Look it up and look at that. It shows me and my wife as the sellers or the owners of this property. So right here, that is the name that you're going to put on the contract. Whatever the tax report shows is what you're going to put on the contract. If it has a little TE right here, it means that this property is held in a trust. If it's held in a trust, there's a couple other disclosures that you need to do. But for training purposes, let's assume that this property is held David and Kristen Hubble. So right here, I put Mr. Seller. And again, it would be David Hubble. And then seller number 2 would be Kristen Hubble. Okay? So there's our seller's names. If you absolutely can't find it, good solution, pick up the phone, call the listing agent. You're going to tell the listing agent anyway, hey, I'm writing up an offer. I can't seem to find your seller information. What are your seller's names? Get that information, put it on the contract. If you just absolutely cannot find it, there is, I prefer not to do this, but you can say of record. I prefer not to do it, but it will hold weight. So that means of record, whatever's on record is our seller's name. But again, that is an absolute last resort. Just prefer to do seller number 1, seller number 2. There's no reason why you can't find that information. All right, now we're scrolling down. I'm sorry, so this is the civil code explaining the agency disclosure. Again, if you want some late night reading, feel free to read the civil code. Then there's one more disclosure explaining to the buyer, hey, possible representation of more than one buyer. I'm a super agent. I have a lot of clientele. I'm representing you right now, but it doesn't mean that there's not going to be another buyer that walks into our office and I'm going to have to represent them as well. So there could be multiple buyers. There could be multiple buyers under this agency. If there's multiple sellers on the property. And again, explaining dual agency, that if you have a buyer and you're the listing agent, that's considered dual agency. If you have the buyer and another agent in our company has a listing, that's considered dual agency. Then we're explaining to the buyer that, hey, not all offers are confidential. So the only time I really ever have to be a concern is if this is a multiple offer situation. You might consider making your offer confidential. So the listing agent can't use your offer to bid up other offers. So as a good buyer's agent, you're always trying to think of ways to protect your buyer. Well, if I'm competing with other offers and I don't make my offer confidential, that listing agent can talk about my offer to other agents to try to boost the terms. So if it's not a multiple offer situation, it's not really even a big deal because there's no one that the listing agent's going to be talking to, because you're just dealing with one or the other. So it's kind of a formality. But if it's a hot property, this is a good little clause to protect your buyers, is just you shoot over a confidentiality agreement. Say, hey, I'm going to be submitting an offer, but it's confidential. I don't want you discussing my offer with other agents. And you make that perfectly clear to the listing agent. And as a professional, the listing agent will be bound to apply to follow those terms. Now, listing agent and the seller can always come back and say, no, I don't want to sign that confidentiality agreement. Send me your offer or go kick sand. They have that option, but at least you're putting it out there first before you go any further, if that's what your buyer wishes. So always put your buyer's needs in front of your own. Always make sure you disclose to the buyer and get the direction from the buyer, what direction you want to go, and you're giving recommendation. Okay, so now we're coming down to seller. You can see that this stuff auto-populated. I did not put it in here. This right here is who is the listing agent and what is the listing agent. So this is the other company. So whether it's Keller Williams, Century 21, another local brokerage, whatever brokerage it is, it goes in right here. Maybe it's another Hubble real estate agent, which would be awesome, guys. But you would put that broker's company right here, their broker ID. So let's assume that we double end a lot of stuff in our company. So we're going to put Hubble Real Estate Group right here because the other agent is part of our company. And let's say I'm working, my dad, our broker Bob, is the other agent on the other side. So I would put his name right there. This information is on the MLS. So you would scroll down and find out who's the listing agent on the transaction, and you would put their information right there. Now we're coming down to the heart of the offer. So again, we're going to date it the day that you're preparing the offer. And then we're putting the address in here. So 271 Ponderosa. And that's in Napomo, California, 93444. Cool. And we're asking Mr. Buyer, what would you like to offer? Oh, well, you know, the house is listed. Well, what's the house listed for? Well, it's listed for $1 million. Okay. I want to offer $950,000. Okay. Now, this is your job, is to explain to them whether they have a strong offer or a weak offer. So again, if the house is listed for $1 million and there's 3 offers on the table, or the listing agent has informed you that there's already offers on the property, or you went to the property and while you were there, other agents are showing up with buyers and you can hear in the background that the buyers are like, let's go back and write an offer. You need to be aware of the market. You need to be aware of what is hot and what's not. So if it's a hot property, 950 is a waste of time. If it's been on the market for a while, you call the agent and the agent uses words like, you know, I've had offers or I've had calls, a lot of exposure, but I just don't have any writing. You need to ask the exact question. Do you have offers on the property? Do you have a physical offer in your hand? Not a promise of an offer. That's all hype. Do you have an offer? Yes or no? Yes, I have an offer. Okay. Is that offer asking price? No, it's not. Is it close to asking price? I really don't want to talk about it. All right. Well, what information can I get from the seller? You know, how long has it been on the market? What sort of activity have you had? How long have you had that offer? Are you in counter stages? Did you just get the offer? Is the offer from an agent in your office? Is the offer from you? You know, do you think that there is a benefit if the listing agent wrote the offer themselves? Yes. So right there is going to tell you, all right, I definitely need to make my offer strong, or I'm competing with the listing agent that has a vested interest to try to dual this. I mean, that's the reality. They always say that they don't, but yeah, if that listing agent can get a double commission, of course they're going to want to try to do that and get their buyer to have the best offer possible. So you need to make your offer confidential at that time, because you don't want that listing agent to talk to their buyer about your offer, which means you buying that listing agent, do not talk to your buyer about my offer. So then it's a fair proceedings. It's fair that buyer one and buyer two are basically both competing for this property, and there's no inside information getting passed along. If the house has been on the market for say 30 days, there's no activity, you feel that you pulled the comps and you feel that they're priced a little high, make sure you give your recommendation to your buyer. Hey, this is where we can come in a little bit under the asking price. This is where we can adjust our offer to make sure that we're doing what you want. I want to make sure that you're bidding on a property on what the market will bear. So again, you're giving that information to the buyer. You are not to tell the buyer, make an offer for $950. You are not buying this property, your buyer is. So anytime the buyer goes, well, what should I do? Here's my recommendation, but you always follow up with, at the end of the day, Mr. Buyer, you're buying this property. What do you want to do? And you pause. If you got a husband and wife, get up and walk out of the room. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to talk about how much you want to offer on this property. You've given them all the facts. You've given them your recommendation, but that's your job. And now you back out and let the buyer decide what they want to offer. Because at the end of the day, if they don't get it, the last thing you want is your buyer to blame you. You told me to offer $950 and I didn't get this property. You're fired. Don't put yourself in that position. So walk out of the room, let the buyer make that decision, come back in 5 minutes. All right, so what'd you decide? Well, we want to offer $950. Awesome. Now we're rolling to close date. How long do you want to be in escrow? Do you want to make it a quick escrow? Do you want to make a long-term escrow? Do we need to get financing? All these things need to come into play. If it's a cash deal, there's no reason why your clients can't perform a little quicker. And this is where terms can actually win the offer. So maybe you're offering a little under asking price, but you've got a quick close with low contingencies or whatever. Those terms are very attractive to a seller. So you're always keeping that in mind. It's not always about price. There's terms that are involved also. Very standard is a 30-day escrow. So right here, 30 days. Right here is you would pick a specific date. Now, preference, I prefer, now again, depending on the client, I prefer writing in a date that says, hey, I got 30 days after acceptance, because this negotiation may take 2 weeks. Well, no, that's overspeaking. I mean, that's way overspeaking. This negotiation may take like 4 or 5 days. Let's say we're coming in and it's like counter after counter after counter after counter. The most counters I've ever had is 13. But let's say the negotiation takes 4 days. Well, you're eating up your days. If you say you have a 25-day or 30-day escrow and it takes 4 to 5 days to do your negotiation, the reality is you really have 25 days now in your escrow. So just be cautious about that. If you do put a date here and then you start getting into it with the other agent and you're countering, all of a sudden this is taking a week, you might need to apply that new close date on the counter that says, hey, our new close date is now 30 days out from when we get closer. Once you start negotiating price and terms and all that, then your last counter is your small stuff. Like, okay, let's make sure that our close date, we all agree on our close date. So if you have a close date, goes here. If you have a time frame or 30 days, goes there. Roll down, it says confirmation. Who is the listing agent? So again, if this was a other broker, because again, you're representing the buyer. So the selling broker would go here. And if that selling broker is outside our company, they represent the seller exclusively. And you as the buyer broker represent the buyer exclusively. Now, if both of these brokers are the same, so both agents are under Hubble Real Estate, it is considered both buyer and seller. Both buyer and seller. You need to make sure you disclose to the client correctly. So even though you're different agents, because you're under the same company, it is considered a dual agency. So both buyer and seller. Hubble Real Estate represents both. It's not you as the agent, it's what is the company. The company is representing both. Then we're coming down here, financing terms, initial deposit. How much is a deposit? It's very common that 1% is the deposit. But again, this is a negotiable item. So you ask your client, what do you want to put as your deposit? Well, what does a deposit mean? Deposit means once you get in, you do all your checks, you give a commitment to the sellers that you want to buy their house, and then you back out, that money is at risk. That deposit is your commitment to the sellers. Now, if they're still in their contingency period, that is their inspections, their disclosures, their loan, their appraisal, if they're within that window, that deposit, and they have not released their contingencies, that deposit's not at risk. You can never tell them that you won't lose the deposit because sellers can dig in for whatever reason. But if you have a contingency in place, you're protected. You never can control what the sellers are going to do, but per the contract, the buyers have not done anything wrong. Once they release their contingency and they committed to the seller, hey, I've done my inspections, I've checked my disclosures, I've gotten my loan commitment, I've released my appraisal, I've released all my contingencies, and then they tell the seller, yes, I want to buy this property, and then they back out because they lost their job right before escrow closes and they back out, yes, the buyer's deposit at that point would be at risk. So what is it that you want to risk? How much do you want to lock up? 1% is typically standard. So $9,500 would be a fair offer. On $1 million property and you wanted to make it a little more attractive, $25,000 would be a very attractive offer. $15,000 would be attractive. $9,500 is it's nothing impressive. On $1 million property, you're putting 10 grand up. Anyone who's buying $1 million property, 10 grand is like, I got 10 grand in the bank, no big deal. So you might want to bump that up. I'd say like 20,000 to show the seller that you're a serious buyer. How are you going to do this deposit? I'm going to do it with a personal check. And I'm going to take it down to within 3 business days after acceptance. So you have 3 business days to get your deposit. Mr. Buyer, you have 3 business days to get your deposit down to escrow. And that's what this says. Buyer represents that funds will be good when deposited with the escrow holder. Do not touch, do not take a check. I don't even care if you're going to go make a copy of it. You tell your buyer, no thanks, just take it to escrow. There's no need to touch a check anymore nowadays. It's not necessary to submit your offer. So what you're saying right here is that all deposits will be made within 3 days after acceptance. So if you have a listing agent that says, oh, I don't see a copy of the deposit check, that's because per the contract, we will have that money in escrow 3 days after acceptance. There's no reason that I need to have a check because that's the way we wrote our offer. If you do touch a check or take a check, there's a whole protocol that has to happen with our trust account, and there's documents and paperwork that needs to get filled out. It's just more work for you for an unnecessary cause. So if buyer says, who do I write the check out to? You write it out to the escrow company. The moment we get an acceptance, I'll give you the escrow company's name and number, and you can walk it down or wire it or whatever, however you want to get it to escrow per the contract right here. You're going to take it down to escrow and make a deposit at escrow. This right here, buyer's deposit with agent. Buyer has given deposit, personally checked to the agent. We should never check this box. I don't want to see that in our company. So try to stay away from that. The deposit shall be held uncashed, blah, blah, blah. Again, don't want to see that. Even if you have a buyer that says, hey, I'm going out of town and I need you to hold the check for me to do it. Nope. Tell you what, ask for more time right here. When are you coming back? I'm coming back in 10 days. All right. Well, then we're going to deposit the fund in 10 days. Or why don't we wire it? I mean, anywhere in the world, you should be able to send checks as long as you have the correct wiring instructions. Oh, well, I'll be back 5 days after we open escrow. All right. Well, then we're going to have it there 5 days. So just change your terms. Okay. Moving on, really not that big of an issue. Increase the deposit. Increase the deposit means that sometime during the escrow, you're agreeing to increase the deposit. So within 10 days after we open, after acceptance, we're going to increase the deposit by $5,000 to show we're serious. I don't use this clause very often, but every term is different per buyer on what makes your offer attractive. Now down here on item number C, if they are offering all cash with no loan, you would be checking this box. If they are offering with a loan, then you would not check this box. Now, if you're doing a loan or you need to show verification of funds, so I'm sorry, if say you're putting 20% down, you need to show $200,000. You're checking this box, buyer shall within 3 days after acceptance, deliver the seller a verification. Now, most sellers want to see that you have the funds available to buy, especially if you're doing an all cash offer or you're putting a large sum down. It strengthens your offer to present that when you present your offer to the seller. So if I were you, I would talk to your buyer. This is you prepping your buyer also. As you've been working with this buyer, you're telling the buyer, go get pre-qualified, go do this, go do that, get your loan paperwork ready, get your pre-qual letter, get me something from your tax accountant that says you're capable of buying $1 million property because you have the funds in your bank. Anything like that would be acceptable. There's zero reason why you need to get a bank account statement. Some buyers want to give that to you. If they do, you're crossing out any and all personal information. I would prefer that you just have something in writing from a financial planner or a CPA that verifies that those funds are available. It's a lot more, it doesn't give personal information out for your client. So, and if you attach that verification to the offer, you don't need to check this. If you call the listing agent, hey, I'm going to have that for you tomorrow. My client's running down to the CPA to get that letter for you. I'll have that for you tomorrow. Then you would just check, hey, I'll have that for you 1 day after acceptance. Now let's assume they are getting a loan. A lot of people have questions, well, how do I fill this part out of the offer? Okay, so they are offering $950,000. Okay, they're going to put 20% down. That means, follow me here because this is, some people have a hard time with math. So you have 950. So you're going to take 950,000 times 0.20. That means that they're doing a loan for 0.20 is 0.20%. So they're putting 80% down. Well, that comes out to $190,000. The $190,000 is the money that they're coming in with. That's their 20%. So you can take 950 and you minus $190,000. That means that they'll be getting a loan for $760,000. Okay? So you can do it two ways. You can take 950 times 0.20, which tells you how much they need to come in with. Or you can take 950 times 0.80, which means that they're getting an 80% loan to value. So if they offer 950, they're getting a loan for 80% of that, equals 760,000. That 760 goes right here. Now you need to disclose to the seller what type of offer they're doing. They're doing a conventional loan as the default. If it's FHA, VA, or you're asking the seller to finance the deal. So it defaults as a conventional. FHA and VA, you need to make sure you disclose. All right, so now we're coming down to, let's assume that it's a conventional loan. They're putting 20% down, which means they're getting a loan for 80%. 80-20, if you hear that in the industry, that's a very common conventional loan. You'll also hear an 80-10-10, which means they're getting an 80% first, a 10% second, and they're coming up with 10%. So if that's the case, they're financing 90% of the transaction. So you would go 950 times 0.90 equals 855,000. So 855 is the amount that they're financing. But again, it would be a 760 first, and it would be a 95,000 second. And that's what this is saying. So you're disclosing to them that I'm getting a conventional loan for $760,000. And then I'm getting a second loan for $95,000. That's a total of, I'm coming up with $95,000. $20,000 as my deposit, plus at the close of escrow, I'll bring another $75,000 to the table for a total of $950,000. Okay. I don't like filling in. I don't fill in any of this stuff saying that my loan not to exceed a certain interest rate. If for any reason interest rates change, you can put it in here and you can use that as an out, which says if interest rates go higher than 4.5, I can back out. But at the end of the day, you have an umbrella of a loan contingency, and that's part of your loan contingency. So if you release your loan contingency, you're pretty much agreeing that my loan's done. So you don't really need this term in here, because just your loan contingency alone is your blanket, is your protection, which means if you can't get a loan for $760,000 and $995,000, then you can back out just for that reason alone. You don't have to explain to them why you couldn't get your loan. You just couldn't get your loan, period. And that's what the loan contingency is there for. All right, coming down to FHA. If you do check the box FHA right here, you're going to see it's going to add an FHA form. And down here, buyer has 17 days after buyer has 17 days after acceptance to deliver to seller a notice. It's called an FHA form. Basically it means that within 17 days, you got to get this form over that talks about appraisal and that the FHA home needs to appraise for your purchase price. So there is some disclosures that need to go over from the lender to the seller, because it is a FHA loan. Also, same thing with FHA or VA. It's a mandatory clause. And so here's the disclosures that are going to get pulled in. So just know if you check one of these boxes, there's going to be more forms that need to come in. But those forms can come after the escrow. Once you open escrow, you're going to work with the transaction coordinator, and she's going to get all the proper documentation together for disclosures and get that over. So your job really is to make sure you know what type of financing they're going to do, whether it's conventional, FHA, VA, or are you asking the seller to finance the deal as well? Now down here, additional financing terms. This is where you can ask the seller to credit my buyer $5,000 for recurring and non-recurring closing costs. So if you're asking the seller, hey, we're offering $950,000, but I want you to apply $5,000 towards my buyer's closing costs. Basically, I want my buyer to finance the closing costs because we're going to roll them into the loan. You're going to give me money back to finance this transaction. You need to make sure you ask for recurring and non-recurring, because there's two types of closing costs that the buyers get hit with. And by saying recurring and non-recurring, you're just blanketing that any and all closing costs, I want this $5,000 to apply towards. So if the lender has a fee and then escrow has a fee, I don't care if it's lender or escrow, my client gets $5,000 towards those fees. So that would be a clause that you can ask for, especially when you're dealing with first-time home buyers. Maybe they only have the money, they're doing an FHA loan, so that's 3.5% down. And the buyer's like, I only have 3.5% down. But on top of the 3.5% down, that's their money, their down payment, this right here. There's an additional $6,000 in closing fees. And they're like, I only have $3,000. I only have my 3.5% to come to the table. Then you're going, no problem. We're going to ask the seller to pay for the closing fees. So all you have to do is come to the table with 3.5% and the seller will pick up the rest. And we're going to roll your closing fees into the purchase price. So that clause right there would protect you. All right. Now we're rolling down to, that's going to be good for today. I will wrap. So we're doing page 1 of the offer contract today because it's taken a little longer than I thought. So tomorrow we'll do page 2 of the offer. And I think this is 10 pages, so it'll be multiple videos for this training class. So I hope that helps for page 1 and page 2 to follow again on the next video. But please reach out if you're uncomfortable with any of this. If you ever need support or eyes on your offer, that's where you're going to the back end of the website. You're booking an appointment with one of our broker support, and we're setting up a webinar to go walk you through, and you explain what your intent is and what you're trying to do, and we will make sure that your offer reflects that. Again, so if you're a newer agent, you don't want to try to maneuver through all of this with your client sitting right there at the conference table and you've never done this. You can get lost very quickly, and then you lose faith with your client loses faith with you. So you want to make sure you do this outside, and then you bring your client in and then you walk them through it. If you're an experienced agent, then I hope I've just given you a little bit of tips or knowledge on how to make your offer tighter or tactics to make your offer better. And you can do it right there. Like literally, you should be able to get to a point where you're writing this offer in like 15 minutes, if not sooner. It's a very simple offer. Once you understand all the clauses in here, it's a very simple form to just go through, fill out. You have your client right there, boom, you print it, sign it, and it's off and running. All right, guys, I hope that helps today. Offer number 2 or page number 2 to follow, and hope that helps, and go get an escrow. All right, talk to you guys soon. Bye.